So, have you ever looked at someone calling the shots and just thought, how did they get there?
Yeah, it's a pretty common puzzle, isn't it?
It really is. We've all seen people who, well, seem less equipped for the job somehow rise up, while maybe more competent folks get overlooked.
It's perplexing. And that's exactly what we want to dig into today.
Right. For this deep dive, we're going to look at Niccolo Machiavelli. You know, the famous, maybe often misunderstood political thinker.
But we're also bringing in modern psychology, too, to really try and understand it from different angles.
Yeah, because Machiavelli, writing way back when, he wasn't focused on some, like, perfect ideal of leadership.
No, not at all. It was about the gritty reality, how power is actually gained, how it's kept. His insights can be, well, pretty sharp.
And one of his big ideas we'll explore is this. When you're talking about getting and keeping power, how capable you seem. That's often way more important than how capable you really are.
It's all about the image, the appearance.
That's a really crucial distinction he made.
Yeah, he famously said something like, everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. That gap, perception versus reality, that's key here.
Which makes you think about more recent examples, like Donald Trump's rise in U.S. politics.
That's definitely a case study people talk about in this context.
Think about it. He outperformed a whole field of really seasoned Republican politicians, people with long track records, deep policy knowledge.
Right, experienced people.
Yet Trump, who wasn't always seen as the, let's say, the most policy-driven candidate, he got the nomination and then, the presidency.
And that example, whatever your politics, it does illustrate how projecting strength, projecting absolute conviction,
Yeah.
how that can sometimes just outweigh traditional competence in that race for influence.
So for you listening in, our goal today is to really try and understand this often kind of uncomfortable relationship between incompetence or perceived incompetence and power.
We're going to unpack some surprising psychological stuff, social dynamics.
And hopefully by the end, you'll have some insights that, might click with things you see, maybe in your workplace, or just making sense of the wider world.
Okay, so let's start with Machiavelli's point about appearing capable.
Yeah, what's really striking is how early he spotted this, that just seeming to have the right skills could be more useful than actually having them, especially when you're trying to get ahead.
He basically said that people who just project this air of confidence, of certainty, they often get an edge.
And why is that? Well, Machiavelli thought that genuinely intelligent people, their strengths could actually hold them back sometimes.
How so?
Like their nuanced thinking, seeing all sides of an issue, maybe even their moral compass, that can look like weakness or indecision when you're up against someone making really bold, simple claims.
That's right. Machiavelli saw that the intellectual honesty, the self-doubt that often comes with real smarts, that can be a handicap against rivals who just aren't bothered by that kind of thinking.
They can make huge promises, sound totally certain, without that internal voice saying, hang on, is this really right?
Exactly. It makes you think about history, like Socrates.
Oh yeah, Socrates constantly questioning everything.
And ultimately seen as a threat by Athens, right? Contrast that with populist leaders then and now who gain traction by offering those really simple, absolute answers people seem to want.
Definitely. Socrates saying, I know that I know nothing. It's profound, but it's not exactly a winning slogan, is it?
Not really. Machiavelli saw that leaders who just declare, I've got the answer, follow me, they often find people ready to listen.
And this isn't just ancient history. There was that interesting management study, a bit controversial maybe, but it suggested there might be a point where too much intelligence becomes a disadvantage for leadership.
You mean the IQ thing? Like above 120 or something?
Yeah, that idea.
Yeah.
That while generally intelligence helps leadership, maybe at the very high end, it plateaus or even dips slightly.
And the thinking behind that, I believe, was that maybe people with really complex ways of thinking might struggle to connect, to really communicate effectively with people processing things differently.
Their ideas might just go over people's heads, hindering their ability to, build support and get things done.
It's a curious thought, isn't it, that being too smart could sometimes feel like a barrier. It feeds into this perception versus reality thing.
But it's not just about pure intelligence. Let's bring in that psychological idea, the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Ah, yes, Dunning-Kruger. This is absolutely key.
Explain it for us.
Okay, so it's a cognitive bias. Basically, people who don't know much about something often think they know a lot more than they do. They overestimate their competence.
While the real experts.
The real experts tend to do the opposite. They underestimate their own skills because they're so aware of how much they don't know, how complex the field actually is.
It's almost funny, but it has huge implications for who gets ahead.
Totally. And it's not a new insight, really. Think about Shakespeare.
The fool doth think himself wise.
But the wise man knows himself to be a fool. Exactly.
Whoa.
Centuries before psychologists named it.
Machiavelli. If he were around today, he'd probably point to Dunning-Kruger as a major factor in power dynamics.
Absolutely. The confident pronouncements of someone with, frankly, limited understanding can often sound more persuasive than the careful, qualified statements of a genuine expert.
And we have research backing this up now. That 2020 study, I think it was in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology,
Yes, I know the one.
it found that people who just act really confident are more likely to be seen as leaders, even if their actual competence isn't, up to scratch.
The performance of confidence trumps actual ability
Oh,
sometimes.
it's like the appearance is just more compelling.
It really is. That outward show of certainty is a powerful signal, even if it's, well, hollow. Think about examples like George Armstrong Custer.
Little Bivhorn Custer.
Yeah. Hugely overconfident in his military plans, led to disaster, but he got promoted quickly and had a really loyal following before that.
Or in business. You see these visionary types, maybe sometimes too visionary. Adam Newman at WeWork, perhaps.
That's a potential example, yeah. Attracting huge investment, a massive following, based largely on this unwavering self-belief, even when maybe the fundamentals were shaky.
And it's not just one place, Masayoshi Son at SoftBank. Despite some big losses, he still commands attention, partly through sheer force of will, that conviction.
Or even, thinking back, the rise of some Russian oligarchs after the Soviet collapse. Often more about boldness and connections than, say, proven business acumen.
Which is such a contrast to somewhere like Singapore.
Right, where they've deliberately trying to build systems that prioritize actual competence, trying to look past just the confident facade.
They have these really rigorous processes trying to suss out genuine ability.
Exactly. And it's interesting, related research from Stanford and Houston suggested that in unstructured groups, guess what predicts who becomes leader?
Not competence.
Narcissism, often. But, and this is the kicker, those groups led by narcissists didn't necessarily perform any better.
Yeah. Wow. So it seems like our brains just take this mental shortcut.
Pretty much. We see confidence, we think competence, we see decisiveness, we think clarity. It's a heuristic.
A kind of rule of thumb.
Yeah, probably useful back in our evolutionary past. Maybe for quickly judging who seems like a strong protector or hunter. But in today's complex world,
It can lead us badly wrong. It helps explain how some people seem to climb the ladder so fast, maybe without the expected qualifications.
but there's another layer. Machiavelli pointed out this idea that incompetence can actually perpetuate itself.
Ah, the self-perpetuating cycle. Tell us about that.
This is a really critical point about how incompetence gets baked into organizations, even whole systems. Machiavelli saw that leaders who aren't very effective, they often surround themselves with people who are even less capable.
He really put it bluntly in The Prince, didn't he? Something about judging a ruler by the people around him.
The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is by looking at the men he has around him. Spot on.
So why do they do that? Why surround yourself with weaker people?
Well, the thinking is, insecure leaders feel threatened by really talented people on their team.
They might show the leader up, or even take their job.
Exactly. It's what Dr. Thomas Chamorro Pre-Music called the competence threat. So to avoid that threat, these leaders choose subordinates who won't challenge them, who aren't likely to outshine them.
So they value loyalty, or maybe just harmlessness, over actual skill.
Precisely. And that kicks off this downward spiral. A kind of competence drought starts at the top and spreads down.
Can you give us some examples?
Historically, think about the Roman Emperor Commodus.
The one from the movie Gladiator.
That's the one. He apparently replaced capable officials with flatterers, wrestlers, entertainers. Not exactly great for running an empire. It arguably sped up Rome's decline.
And more recently,
Well, you could argue elements of this appear in various political systems. Sometimes loyalty to a party or a leader seems to count for more than proven ability. Or think about the late Qing dynasty in China. Appointing loyalists instead of competent officials had terrible economic consequences.
and this happens inside companies too, right? That idea of homophily.
Yeah, homophily, love of the same. People tend to stick with others who are similar to them. So if you have an incompetent leader, they're likely to hire and promote people like themselves, creating this echo chamber.
An echo chamber of incompetence.
Right. It cuts them off from different views, from constructive criticism. Everyone just agrees with the boss, even if the boss is wrong.
It makes you think. Have you ever been in a meeting or a group where asking tough questions just wasn't welcome?
Or where you got labeled as not a team player just for pointing out a potential problem.
Yeah, that can be a sign of this dynamic. But even when we see this, why are we still so often drawn to leaders offering really simple answers?
This taps into something deep in our psychology, our need for certainty, especially when things feel complex or scary.
Because real experts, they usually don't offer simple answers, do they?
Almost never. They talk about nuances, trade-offs, probabilities. They know there are limits to what we know. It's complicated.
Whereas the leaders who rise by just saying, it's simple, do X, they're hitting a different button.
Exactly. Remember what Machiavelli said about appearances?
The majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances as though they were realities.
And are often more influenced by things that seem than by those that are. It speaks right to that craving for clear, easy answers, even if they're, well, wrong.
Think about a crisis. Who do people turn to? The person saying, look, this is complex, we need to weigh options.
Or the one saying, don't worry, I've got the simple fix. It's usually the second one, isn't it?
Sadly, yes. Look at huge issues like climate change.
You've got complex science, careful models, versus simple slogans, often absolute denials or promises. Which one grabs headlines?
The simple one, often. Same with something like healthcare reform.
Experts talk about incredibly complex trade-offs. Politicians often promise everything: better care, lower costs, no downsides, which sounds better.
The easy promise, even if it's unrealistic.
Exactly. And there was that Yale study showing how we even process information in a biased way.
Oh yeah, people use data to confirm what they already believed politically.
Even people with strong math skills. They twisted the interpretation of complex data to fit their existing views. Confirmation bias on steroids.
Wow.
Psychologists call this general tendency our need for cognitive closure. We just want answers. We dislike ambiguity, uncertainty.
And that gets stronger when we feel threatened.
Research suggests yes. When we feel insecure, we crave that closure even more. We become more susceptible to simplistic black and white thinking and, crucially, to authoritarian leaders who project that absolute confidence.
So the scarier the world feels, the more appealing the simple, confident leader becomes. It's like a psychological vulnerability.
It really can be. But beyond intelligence and certainty, Machiavelli hit on something even more controversial: the role of morality, or perhaps amorality.
Right, this is where he really gets his reputation. He basically said that being strictly moral can actually be a disadvantage in the power game.
It's a tough pill to swallow, but that was his observation. He wrote in The Prince that a ruler must learn how not to be good, and to use this knowledge and not use it, according to necessity.
Learn how not to be good. That's pretty stark.
It is. He saw that people with a strong moral compass who wrestle with ethical dilemmas might hesitate or hold back in ways that someone less burdened by ethics wouldn't.
So in a competition, the person willing to, say, lie or cheat has an advantage over someone playing by the rules.
That's the uncomfortable logic. Someone willing to make empty promises, use deception, stir up fear or prejudice. They just have more tools in their toolkit, tactically speaking, than someone committed to integrity.
Think about Cicero versus Julius Caesar.
Classic example. Cicero, principled, eloquent, but ultimately outmaneuvered. Caesar, brilliant, but also ruthless and willing to cross lines. Cicero wouldn't. Guess who ended up on top?
Caesar. And you see echoes today, maybe? Ethical candidates sometimes struggle against opponents using attack ads, misinformation.
It seems that way sometimes, and research even hints at this in the corporate world too.
How so?
Well, some studies have found correlations between certain traits, like maybe low empathy combined with superficial charm, sometimes linked to psychopathy, and faster career advancement in some settings.
Seriously?
It suggests that in certain highly competitive environments, there might be this kind of race to the bottom dynamic, where less ethical behavior can, unfortunately, be rewarded.
That's quite a sobering thought. But surely not all environments reward this. Are there places where competence and ethics are more likely to win out?
That's the crucial next question. Machiavelli himself knew that different situations favor different qualities. Some environments naturally filter for competence, while others almost seem to invite incompetence.
So what makes the difference? What are the key factors?
Okay, first, think about feedback loops and accountability. How quickly and clearly does performance get measured, and are there real consequences?
Like a surgeon. If their patients consistently do poorly, that's pretty clear feedback.
Exactly. Or an engineer whose bridges keep falling down. The feedback is direct, undeniable. Contrast that with, say, complex bureaucracies or politics, where the results of decisions might be delayed, diffuse, or easily spun. In those cases, incompetence can hide much more easily.
So clear, immediate feedback helps. What else?
Institutional design is huge. How is power distributed? Are there checks and balances?
Like, highly centralized systems are more vulnerable.
Generally, yes.
Okay.
Think authoritarian states. Weak checks and balances make it easier for an incompetent leader to consolidate power and avoid scrutiny. Compare that to systems with strong independent judiciaries, free press, or maybe corporate structures with genuinely independent boards.
Okay, feedback, institutional design.
What else? Information and complexity matter. If success is easy to measure and compare, like, say, sales figures, competence is harder to fake. But if goals are fuzzy or evaluation is subjective,
Then appearances can take over.
right back to Machiavelli's point about people judging by appearances. If it's hard to tell who's really good, the person who looks good might win.
And one more. You mentioned incentives earlier.
Yes, economic incentives. If the system rewards only short-term results, ignoring long-term consequences, you might get leaders who look great for a quarter or two, but drive the organization off a cliff later. The 2008 financial crisis had elements of that, arguably.
It really makes you think about the environments you're in at work, in your community. What kind of behavior do they actually incentivize? Genuine ability or just looking the part?
It's a really important reflection. Because even in systems that should reward competence, people can still find ways to game it.
So what tactics do these less competent, maybe less ethical leaders use to get and keep power?
Machiavelli would recognize a few classics. One big one is manipulating our tribal instincts, creating strong us versus them feelings.
Identity politics.
That's part of it. Frame any criticism as an attack from the enemy. Make people feel their identity is tied up with supporting the leader no matter what. Psychologists call it identity fusion.
And that makes people incredibly loyal, right? Resistant to outside facts.
Extremely. You see it with cult leaders, dictators,
Yeah.
but also arguably in some mainstream politics. Think about leaders who constantly rail against elites or outsiders. Examples like Najib Razak in Malaysia or Bolsonaro in Brazil might fit this pattern for some observers.
Okay, so divide and conquer, basically. What else?
Another tactic is just creating chaos, information overload, constant crises, controversies, scandals.
Why do that?
It exhausts people mentally. If there's always a new fire to put out, you don't have the bandwidth to step back, analyze the bigger picture, or organize effectively against the leader. It's like keeping everyone perpetually off balance, almost like Orwell's doublethink in real life.
Just overwhelmed and confused. Makes
Sure.
sense. And a third tactic.
Exploiting real anxieties,
Right.
especially economic ones.
Scapegoating.
Often, yes. When people are struggling, feeling left behind, it's easier to offer them a simple enemy to blame: immigrants, foreign countries, some internal group, rather than tackle the complex structural reasons for their problems. You see this appeal in many post-industrial areas, for instance.
It makes you think about your own news habits, doesn't it? Do you sometimes get sucked into the outrage cycle, the sensational stuff, and maybe miss the quieter, more important stories?
It's easy to do.
Yeah.
And it's often exactly what manipulative leaders want to keep the focus on the drama, not the substance.
Okay, so this is all quite concerning. But knowing this, what can we actually do? How do we resist this slide towards incompetence or manipulation?
Well, awareness is the first big step, right?
Ah.
Just recognizing these patterns makes you less likely to fall for them.
Individually, what can I do?
Cultivate intellectual humility. That means being aware of your own biases, the limits of your knowledge, being willing to say, I might be wrong, or I need more information.
Easier said than done sometimes.
True. Also, work on media literacy. Actively learn to tell the difference between solid information and just noise or performance. Choose your sources carefully. Seek out quality over just quantity or sensation.
And maybe step back sometimes.
Definitely. Practice some philosophical reflection. Just take time away from the constant stream of information to think about deeper principles, what really matters. It helps keep perspective.
Okay, so be humble, be critical of information, and think deeply. What about changing the system collectively?
On the institutional level, it comes back to those environmental factors we talked about. We need robust accountability.
Meaning?
Systems that give honest feedback, that hold leaders responsible, no matter how charming or powerful they are. Think of companies with truly independent boards versus ones that just rubber stamp whatever the CEO wants. The Boeing 737X crisis is maybe a cautionary tale there.
Strong oversight. What else?
Promote cognitive diversity. Teams with different viewpoints, backgrounds, ways of thinking, they're just better at spotting problems and challenging bad assumptions. Avoid those echo chambers.
And transparency.
Crucial. Make things open. Don't let complexity become a shield for incompetence or corruption. Things like government sunshine laws, corporate conflict of interest rules, disclosure requirements in medicine. They all help.
And underpinning all of this, education.
Absolutely. Education that doesn't just teach facts, but teaches critical thinking, ethical reasoning, giving people the tools to analyze arguments, spot manipulation, and understand consequences.
It's worth asking, how many of these safeguards are really working in our own communities or workplaces?
It's a vital question.
So bringing it back to Machiavelli as we wrap up.
Yeah, it's key to remember he wasn't telling people to be ruthless and deceptive. He was describing what he saw. He thought understanding the dark side of power was the only way to guard against it, to build better systems.
Like that quote of his, it is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles.
Exactly. Authority should be earned by worthiness, not just seized.
So when you put his insights together with modern psychology, it does reveal some maybe unsettling things about us, about our social systems.
It does. But facing those truths is how we move forward, right? We can try to design systems that account for these human frailties, and we can build our own individual resilience against manipulation.
So there's hope then.
I think so. While foolishness and maybe immorality can grab the spotlight sometimes, ultimately things like wisdom, critical thought, moral courage, those are our best tools for building societies where competence actually matters most.
So a final thought for everyone listening. Have you seen these dynamics play out? In your work, your community, the news, worth reflecting on.
And if you found this deep dive helpful, maybe subscribe, share it with someone else who might be thinking about these things too.
Thanks for joining us to explore this really complex, important topic. Until our next deep dive, maybe remember that sometimes you have to understand the darkness to really appreciate and create the light.